way. It's a little bit awkward for me that this is the third subsequent time I'm coming on this stage and going on speaking. I can ensure that I will not take more than 15 minutes maybe, so that some time is left for if anyone wants to say anything, I can at least try to interact. Firstly, let me speak in a very clear terms that if you look at the title of the address, which is Evolving Adivasi Art Forms in Contemporary Arunachal, Emerging Realities and Transcending Collective Consciousness. As I have already talked about in the introductory session, that I am basically an anthropologist, studied in the University of Calcutta. But then, since my professional career in the Anthropological Survey of India, and as I have told, I stayed what we call the elusive India's northeast region for more than 30 years, which includes my 5 years of stay in the National Museum. But while in National Museum also, I tried to move the wheel of the National Museum towards India's northeast to a great extent. It is not that I was part of this region for a long time, but I felt that northeast deserved that kind of an attention. Number two, which I also like to say, that as I am repeatedly talking about my linkages with India's Northeast for almost 33 years, but prefixing these 33 years, I don't intend to build up any sense of authority over the space or the community in the region, because I know the complexities of the issues involved, and from this background I try to build up some broad and brief ideas what I am trying to focus in terms of what is happening to the question of tribal art forms in the contemporary Arunachal. In order to build up the backdrop, let me also add that while staying in Arunachal, the university where I was located, we did a 5 years collaborative project with British Museum. I know many of you I was seeing in social media this issue also, that what is British in the British Museum. That's a different kind of an discourse altogether when we talk about the idea of decolonization and all this stuff in relation to methods, and even in the context of, we have read the Talat Ashad book. We know Bernard Cohen, colonialism and its forms of knowledge. But there was another significant book also, which was very favorite to me. I am sure Sinasar is here. That is also by Bernard Cohen, which talks about the exact title of this book is Conversation Between Anthropologists and Historians. The preface or the foreword is written by none other than Ranajit Guho. Now, if you look into I'll just place some elementary information about Arunachal because most of the time in the media, whether it is digital or print media or whether you call it the mainstream media, Arunachal comes in the circulation, larger circulation, because of the occasional Chinese claim over some part of its territory. And then the media house like NDTV had to organize a big fight to make us understand the question of Arunachal in the context of the security strategies of our nation state or in other ways. But in the process, what is not circulated is the question of the nature of transformation or the kind of negotiation which the people of this state had to undergo in terms of their everyday nuances of life. I am sure most of you are aware of this is essentially a tribal state having multiple international boundaries, but Tibet or the China's presence remains the most fundamental part. That is right now beyond our the notion of discussion as such. The state is represented by 26 major tribes and accompanied by large number of smaller tribes, or if we tell the minor tribes. Now the idea of major and minor, I am not trying to build up any kind of an value-loaded concept. It is primarily in relation to their numerical strength and perhaps most importantly in terms of their accessibility in the power structure, or what we call their presence in running the what we call the statecraft. That's we are largely talking about this classification. But if you look at the government statistics, you will see sometimes this number go on changing very rapidly. So that kind of confusion remains in terms of identifying the major minor binaries, which is precisely linked with the question of their what we call the construction of ethnic identities. I'm not dealing with that also, but I wanted to have that everyone must have this elementary background in terms of what I'm trying to deal with. Now, within this large number of tribes, there are certain tribes who are located across the border of Nagaland. I'm basically referring to, as an anthropologist, we are always prefer to deal with specific micro situation. I'm trying to locate the Wangchus of Arunachal Pradesh. Some of you must be aware of, because many times they are perceived as a kind of the larger Naga constellation. You know, I think most of you must be aware of regarding the Greater Nagaland question, the idea of Nagaling, and its obvious implication in terms of what is happening to those, the question of political and cultural boundaries between Nagaland and their demand for the larger Nagaland. I am not going into that. If you ask a Wangchu, for example, whether they consider themselves a Naga, none of them will tell that they will say we are the Wangchus, we are not Nagas. Now this is, again, this has the background, though if you go to the certain Wangchu villages which are in higher altitude, they don't come to the Longding, which is a new district, they will go to Nagaland for their day-to-day marketing because they are bordering with the Nagaland. It is much more easier for them to go to Nagaland than to come to the central part of that Longding district, which was earlier part of the Tirap district. Now this tribe was having a tradition which was not only the Wangchus, the Noktes also, another neighboring tribe, we call the idea of head hunting, right, which is no more. But if you look at the history, look at the colonial document, being part of, as I was referring in that context, our 5 years collaborative project with the British Museum, I had a chance to look at majority of the colonial documents kept in India Office, that British Library India Office section. And I did a review of majority of the colonial documents, which runs around 80 pages, which I never published. But when I look at that document and when I see the Wangchus or my own involvement with the state for almost 3 decades in a very dispassionate way, I must say that the state is passing through a major forms of transformation. But to put it in theoretical frame, one of my guru, I'll say, I don't know how many of you heard the name of Professor Arunachal Bhagavati, late Arunachal Bhagavati, who is no more. He has a person who worked in Arunachal since long with Nirmal Kumar Bush since 1960s. He has given an idea of what he calls the third order reality. That you have not left the tradition in a whole scale way. You have incorporated the so-called what we try to project in terms of the elements of modernity, and in the process of continuum, you have built up a kind of an third order reality which is not in pristine form, which has not shifted towards a bipolar concept of modernity as such. Now this Wangchus had, as I told, the tradition of headhunting. Again, there are a lot of debate on this nomenclature itself, that suffixing hunting, how far it is meaningful to understand the essence, or I'll say the consciousness involved in the whole process. Because the moment we call hunting, it talks about different kinds of taking from this idea of consciousness. So there is a lot of debate. Somebody told that it may be better to talk about a taking tradition. Now this is not specific to the Wangchus or the Noktes or many of the tribes of the Nagaland who have visited Hornbill Festival, if any one of you. And this is a practice prevalent in many communities across South Asia. There was a book written by Andrew Haida. The title of the book is War from Ecological Perspective, where Andrew Haida talks about multiple such cases of, if we take right now headhunting as a kind of an cultural practice or attributes of culture, this was prevalent. And most of the cases, this was linked with the notion of the idea of fertility, the idea of the better productiveness in their cultivable land, and the idea of social prestige, which is very, very dominant among the Wangchus. But remember, that doesn't mean that if you visit, of course, in today's context, headhunting is more in post-colonial phase, when Arunachal became, from Nepal to statehood is achieved. Much before that, this is discontinued because of the, obviously, the administrative intervention of the nation state. Now, what I was trying to tell that this is not that if you have visited Wangchu villages, if you look at the older writings on this tribe, that somebody will come and try to headhunt. It is not only the headhunting, when this kind of conflicting situation comes, the war between different villages, which may be within the Wangchus, which may be within the neighboring tribes, they not only took the head, they also taken the different body parts also. Now, I must also add here that Wangchus represent a kind of a social structure which we call chieftainship system. The traditional notion of equivalence, what we perceived in terms of Raja. So their society remained highly stratified, and if you visit even today the chief's house and many of the contemporary political leaders in terms of what we call the modern electoral political system, both the Wangchus and Noktes, it is the chief's families from where majority of the political leaders later on, they have evolved. Of course, today things are changing. There are people also coming from what they call the commoners clan. Now, as I told, the idea of headhunting, it's not an individual choice. It not comes from an individual choice. It comes from the ingrained, the notion of social pride or the community prestige which remains involved. If you are a successful headhunter, and there comes the question of linking their one of the most famous, what we call the wood carving tradition within this tribe. If you are a successful headhunter, when you comes back to the village, along with the village feast, you will be given different kinds of carved wooden heads to wear. And this will also lead to a kind of an specific kind of tattooing in the body. Even those who are surviving very elder generation of the Wangchus, if you go and see them, you can identify how many heads they have taken during those days. That can be reconstructed from the symbols which are given in the form of different kinds of tattoos within their bodies. Professor Bhagavati, which I am referring, he was telling me, who remained our Vice Chancellor, that during 60s when he visited Wangchu areas with Professor Nirmal Kumar Ghosh, some of you must be aware of, who was not only a geographer turned into an anthropologist, became director of anthropological survey of India, but most importantly he remained as a private secretary to Gandhi. He told during 60s, if you visit to the Wangchu villages, any individual can pick up a small wooden piece and with the so-called dao spade, they can carve an excellent wood carving effortlessly, which means the skill or the knowledge was part of their community base. Almost everybody in a Wangchu society build up that skill by which they can prepare an excellent wood carving. I'll refer, if any one of you are interested, look at the book written by Behar Elwin. Some of you must be aware of Ramchandra Ghosh, the biographical book, Savaging the Civilized. Now, if you look at Elwin's book, which talks about art of Northeast frontier agency, Nepal at that time, you will find a lot of photographs of those traditional carvings among the Wangchus. If you are visiting Itanagar, I'll request, if you may not be in a position to go to Longding, which is far away, visit the State Museum, which is called Jawaharlal Nehru Museum. You can see plenty of excellent piece of marvels of wood carving which is produced by the Wangchus. And that was the production based on their collective endeavor, the part of the kind of social relation, the kind of the social structure, the value system. Here comes the question of perhaps collective consciousness. But today, what has happened, the art of tattooing, which was also related to this, is no more in practice, because in 70s, the Wangchu Students Association, in Arunachal, every tribe had their own students association. They have taken a resolution. They have perceived this tattooing as a kind of a disfiguration of the body, both male and women. I am not going into the talking about much in relation to the tattooing part. Seeing the tattooing on the body of a woman, you can understand whether she is married or unmarried, or whether she belongs to a chief's family, or whether she belongs to a, we call, commoners clan. Everything is symbolically written, right, in that kind of a form. Now, Wangchu Students Union took a resolution that this disfiguration is no more allowed in the community. So, as a result of that, there it is a kind of a negativity or the sign of primitiveness. Wangchus lost. It is not the question of tattooing. It was involved a lot of oral tradition, wonderful songs. So, when the tattooing was done, women members used to sing song, which is no more part of their collective social memory. What is happening today is that the whole idea of collective knowledge now confined to 2, 4, 6 individuals in the community who are trained in the what we call the Sarkari emporium. So all these new gadgets came up, and looking at the kind of what we call the demand of market. So maybe from the governor house or from the different state level function, there will be an order for 30 pieces of Wangchu male and female. Now if you see today's production, the wood carving, it comes like as if it is kind of came out of what comes out of a Xerox machine. Just replica of same thing which is going on. So in the process, the kind of diversity, the kind of techniques involved as a part of collective domain, it is no more. It is today a kind of an production which is coming up from the emporium. Very restricted few individuals in the whole Wangchu community are aware of this skill. Tattooing is no more. But in the process, what I will also say, as we have now live in a market-driven world, even if it is an emporium-based skill and knowledge system today, which is completely lost its collective social base, but at least because of this kind of an patronage from the state, the Wangchu wood carving still survives. And as I told, this art of tattooing is no more. But if you come to Arunachal, the university where I was, you talk to an individual. When the community, the Wangchu student has to perform in different kind of a cultural program in the university or in different other programs, you will say they will come with the tattoo and all this, the so-called, which once they have stopped completely from the community representation of the attributes of their culture. So this is, I am not extending it beyond. Such kind of thing can be, I just took the Wangchus as an example, but this is remaining largely true that we are living in a so-called that what we call the globalization, and liberalization becomes almost a password for identifying what is happening today, whether it is in Arunachal or any parts of their country. But I'll end up saying that this has lost the collective consciousness, but with some kind of an individual effort, some kind of effort from the civil society and the state, Wangchu art form still surviving, but it is today, it's a kind of an individual phenomena, individual initiative, but art form still persists. So I'll not take much time. Thank you for listening to me. I thought of giving visuals which could have been wonderful, but if Madam Sengupta plans for a publication, then definitely I will try to build up in a much more articulated form. But I'll request, I have last year I have published a book, it's called People's Art of Northeast India. If anyone of you is interested in the domain of art forms in the context of Northeast, you can have a look. This is not from a big publishing house, it's an area based in Delhi, but they are known for illustrative publication. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir.